One of the things I did over the weekend was watch the first 2 episodes of an SBS drama called The Hunting. It's got Asher Keddy and Richard Roxburgh in it, and it follows the lives of 4 teenagers, some teachers, and their families in the aftermath of a nude teen photo scandal. This is from the trailer.
Something's happened. There's a website. It has students on it, and they're naked.
They want photos of girls that they know.
We put stuff up at school, people wonder where it came from.
Tell me, what did you do? What did you do?
I'm his mother and I know something's not right.
He did that to me.
Is there anything else on this thing that we need to be worried about?
All I did was send it to one person.
It was meant just for you.
The photo. Take it down.
What kind of man do you want our son to become?
Now, some of the questions asked in the show, this is drama and really good drama. I've found it incredibly tense to watch. But while I was watching it, I know my kids are much older now, but while I was watching it, I was thinking, I actually think I would want to sit down with my 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old kids and make them look at this. What's scary about it to me was the fact that it was all so real. A young girl sends a photo of herself to her boyfriend. Other boys get hold of it. The girl's family and teachers find out, and then it finds its way to other places, and well, she really suffers a terrible consequence. Now, according to a newspaper article from the weekend, there were 8 cases of sexting at private schools last year. These included reports that went to the education department from the principal, and the circumstances leading up to each incident, as though they've been taken from the script of this very program that I've been talking about. I don't know if you've seen The Hunting, if you have a view of it, or if it has reminded you of something that went on in your life. Talk to me, please. 1300 222 720. Paul Litherland is the manager of an internet awareness website called Surf Online Safe. Former police officer, goes to school to educate our teens about the potential harm of sexting. Paul, good day to you.
Good evening, Geoff. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. I know you were just listening to that trailer, but it seemed familiar to you.
Yeah, it's unfortunately just a common occurrence we're seeing across most schools realistically in Western Australia, or all over Australia realistically, where unfortunately teens are making these errors of judgment.
Okay, tell me what you go to schools to talk about, Paul.
Well, I talk about a large range of things, from cyberbullying right up to sexting, even scamming now. We're seeing a lot of our kids getting scammed across gaming environments and stuff like that. So it's a myriad of subjects in the online world at the moment.
Okay. Now, they're probably okay with the cyber stuff. They're probably okay with the scams. Are they more nervous when you talk about sexting?
Yeah, especially when you get to year 9s and 10s where statistically some of them are making those errors of judgment. So it can be quite confronting and embarrassing to a degree as well, especially when you're hearing stories, and The Hunting's a great little example of that, where so many of our kids, our teens, are just assuming, oh, it won't happen to me, he won't or she won't send my image. But in most cases, this is exactly what is happening.
Can you give me a practical example of a situation where a teenager has found themselves in real trouble after sending an intimate image? And I do also ask our audience, older members of our audience, to say, you can apply a judgment to this, but if you're a 15-year-old kid, this is a very exciting, dangerous world, and I would guess that we would be doing exactly the same thing. Give us an example of what you...
And that's where I think we forget that a lot of our times. Our kids have their phone with them every 5 seconds of the day, every moment, so they get caught up in these sorts of moments. So it's easy to judge, but, I mean, one case in particular I dealt with was a 14-year-old girl who made an error of judgment in sending a full nude photo of herself to her then boyfriend, and this photo included her face and everything, and 2 sentences: I love you, I trust you. So we would imply as adults, Geoff, that you wouldn't share that, but of course the young boy, being young boys, he did share it with a couple of his mates, and literally within...
Bragging rights.
Yeah, and a lot of it's just that want to share, and unfortunately, and not picking on the boys, a lot of our boys will do that. So unfortunately, within 72 hours, her photo was within 272 phones at that school. So one boy in particular who didn't like this girl for whatever reason posted it to a public website, and in 3 months that photo had been downloaded 38,000 times. So that poor girl to this day, and of course her family 4 years later, is still ringing me saying, look, we found her photo on another website. So that repercussion is massive that we would have never had as kids.
No, my guest on Drive this afternoon is Paul Litherland, former police officer, manager of Surf Online Safe. If you've got a story you'd like to tell, and if it's a personal story, I get it, that this would be very hard. 1300 222 720, but we'd like to hear from you. So that scenario that Paul just gave us, the girl sends a photo of herself to a boyfriend. It's an I love you photo. This is me. Isn't our love beautiful, etc., etc. He passes it to someone else, and we see that in this show too. You look at the motivations of some of these boys for passing these things on the show, and you know it's wrong, but you can see how they've done it. It's sort of a moment of idiocy or whatever. And she then goes back into the school environment, and that image is on hundreds of phones. What is life like for her in that school environment? It must be terrible.
It is a nightmare, and again, it's just that culture. I'm trying to shift that culture, and I think I'm doing quite a good job of it at the moment in Perth. It's just getting our boys in particular, and again, not picking on the boys here, but sadly they're a higher percentage of sharing than the girls, is just to think of the person depicted and think of how far that photo could go, that it could be someone's sister, someone's mother or daughter. So, but unfortunately we just get caught up in the moment. So trying to educate kids in regards to that is difficult, but getting them to understand it. And boys and girls will send nudes in similar sorts of numbers, but where there has to be, I think, much more unique education is the on-sending of nudes.
Of course. You understand as a parent the idea of getting caught up in the moment, and that's where the poor judgment is shown. That's what teenagers do. That's what we all show those kind of things. But what happens when you explain to those kids that in the case of this girl, her image was taken to so many other environments and becomes this piece of personal history that is now in the public realm? Do they get it? Do they understand consequence when you explain it to them?
I think they do, and I think that's where the culture's starting to change. As much as we've had people banging on, I suppose, to a degree about don't do this, don't do that, and this is where I think education has to be based in the fact of understanding consequences, understanding risk, and when you speak, and it's good to see the boys in the room react as well, but the girls get quite shocked in the fact that, okay, as much as young girls and boys are sending, and 21% of girls under the age of 18 compared to 17% of boys will send an intimate image.
Yep.
But where I hit my education so hard, Geoff, is the fact that of those images sent, 38% of girls compared to only 8% of boys who send a nude will have it shared by the person they sent it to. So that's where we need to shift culture. That's where we need to hit that hard.
This is interesting and troubling. Paul Litherland is my guest, but there was some things you're encouraged about. You reckon that there is a little less of it about than there might have been a year ago?
I think there is, and I'm starting to see some really good statistical evidence in regards to that.
Why do you reckon that is?
I think, number one, there's some really good education now across Australia and WA in regards to cyber safety and internet awareness, understanding how far our stuff can go. The introduction of legislation is also, I think, going to have a significant impact on that. But I think where most of it's coming is, I think shows like The Hunting, Catfish are starting to get kids to really understand, or people to really understand at how advanced the internet can be, and privacy doesn't exist anymore. So as long as we can continue to really push that education, and the safety do some great work, so they've got some great resources, and there's, like I said, there's other people around Perth as well.
But significantly this year that you would be able to go into a class and say, do you know what, if this stuff gets out there, or if you do it because you're angry with your girlfriend, now that you've split up, if you think it's okay to pose that picture, you do know what happened to that guy in Fremantle. Now, I know he didn't go to jail, but he was convicted, and the magistrate said, you will go to jail for these behaviours now. Do you reckon that's understood?
I think it is. And Geoff, and where that case in particular had an impact, and where I think this new legislation, intimate image abuse, which is what I've been fighting for very hard for the last 5 years here in Perth, is it gets the victim to be heard. In the past, and I'll give you my time as a police officer at Tech Crime, we were never going to charge a 14-year-old with the distribution of nudes. Why? Because it's child pornography.
Yeah. If
he's convicted or charged, he could face a sex offender register for 7 years.
Yes.
So as a result of that, the victim would go unheard because the offender wouldn't be charged. with adults, that's great. Now this legislation's good because it covers, and this gentleman has learnt a very big lesson for that. But more importantly, the victim's been heard. So this is where with our teens in particular, this legislation's great because it's far less a penalty. But more importantly, if this legislation was around when she went through this, at least those boys who distributed the image would be spoken to by police. It's rare that action would be taken, but at least the victim had a chance to be heard. And this is where that legislation is great, but more importantly, the more times we have people going through it, as both sides of the fence, this gentleman who's been done for it, he's got a very strong story as well as the victim. So this is where I think it'll continue to work.
Yeah, let me just ask a couple of things of you. In what environment are these images being mostly distributed? These are just things it's kind of important for parents to understand. Whereabouts mainly? Most
of the images that are being sent within a relationship, and 88% of images that are sent between boyfriend and girlfriend at school level are sent within a relationship. Now, most of them will stay within a relationship, but some are being shared with peers around a school. That could be anywhere between 5 mates to 50 mates. But we're also seeing now unfortunately, some of our images are being posted onto public websites or Google Drives, so that those images can be shared.
But girlfriend, boyfriend send via what? Snapchat primarily?
Mainly through Snapchat. There are a couple of other little apps out there like Kick Messenger for a start, which is starting to show up again, and other little apps where they can send it.
So we're seeing a little less sexting than we've seen before, but I understand there's a bit more extortion, boys and boys.
Yeah, I'm starting to see that a fair bit in Perth now, which again is something
another form of awful bullying, isn't it?
You never would have had that 20 or 30 years ago. So as an example, and I'll give this young girl's example again, where a boy at school didn't like her, so he sent her own image and said, show me more or I'm going to post this to your parents or I'm going to send it to other people. So she then felt compelled now because she didn't want that image shared to share with him another image. So when we get caught up in that world, it's such a horrible thing for our young kids to go through.
What advice then do you have probably for the parents of these teenagers who are listening to this program and thinking, thank goodness it's not us, but it can so easily, next time your teenage son falls in love with someone, they will enter this world and it's a world you may not know anything about. Is there some advice you would give? Because it sounds like you give those kids really good advice that there are consequences. How will parents have some insight into this?
Oh, Geoff, I mean, it sounds so defeatist to say this as an internet awareness presenter, but honestly, if you can have conversations with your kids, you are halfway there. And again, there's more stuff like this with the hunting coming up. There's more opportunities for our parents to sit down with our kids and experience these sorts of conditions or situations, then it'll help those conversations starting. But sadly, and we talk about 8 nudes that have been distributed in regards to the FOI that's come out. I mean, that's really the tip of the iceberg because sadly our kids won't talk, at the least to parents, let alone anyone else. So we need to continue to build education as much as we can to communicate.
So what's your final word when you leave a school environment? What's the last thing you say to those kids?
Just to think. Take that 5 seconds just to think and really assess the sending of an image. But more importantly for me, it's not about trusting from A to B. It's about trusting where it can go from B. And if you can't be 100% certain of that, then it's best not to send the image in the first place.
Hey, it's really good to meet you, Paul. And I think if there are opportunities for us to get you in to talk about these things, we would very much like to do so. Thank you so much.
Thanks, mate. All the best to you and your listeners. Thank you.
Paul Litherland with some really good advice.